Incredible stuff. And Gary in Leeds, caseworker for the National Education Union. Thanks for getting to us, Gary. You support members who've been victims of violence, and there are far too many, Gary.
Yeah, I mean, certainly in recent years, Nicky, we've had rising numbers where I have to deal with the consequence of violence coming into schools by pupils. What we don't do as an education union is point the finger at pupils and lay the blame on them. I think what's happening in our schools, and schools are a microcosm of society in general, but what's happening in our schools is that society and the way society is moving in terms of the toxicity of narratives in society, they're coming into schools. And I'm talking about, the toxicity of political discourse that we see in this country at the moment. Certainly since 2016 and Brexit, we've just seen a toxic culture at our highest levels of society. Politicians, you only have to watch Prime Minister's Question Time tomorrow, and you see the behaviour of these people who we elect as some of our greatest and good in the country. And their behaviour as adults, well-educated adults and representatives of society, is appalling. And that filters down in many ways, and it comes into our schools. There's also the impact of pretty much unregulated media, social media that we know children are engaging in far too much, but it's almost unregulated. You look at X, Twitter, and the kind of discourse that happens there, children are accessing that. And they're seeing that toxic language being used all the time. Even sort of streaming platforms, things like some of the big streaming companies, to stop children accessing violent imagery and violent films on those platforms is really difficult, because all they're basically doing is saying, are you 18? Click this button. All those things have an impact, and then they come into our schools. And I'm dealing with the consequence of those actions when I'm supporting our members who have been physically attacked in schools. Whilst at a political level, I feel that politicians are not dealing with the symptoms of where this is coming from. We're talking about a political class that have had to suffer their own tragedies in the last few years with Joe Cox and David Amis. They know what happens, and they cry crocodile tears for a few months, and then they go back to this toxic atmosphere, and that filters down into our schools. And it's almost like there's a passive acceptance by some people in society that this is what teachers and support assistants have to put up with. Right. Ultimately, you tell me any other profession that would tolerate any kind of violence against their members.
That is a really strong point to put to Marie. Marie, you've got a minute to address that one. What other profession would tolerate this? We've also got to the point that teachers think, oh, that's just part of the job. That's a disgrace, Marie Gentles, isn't it?
Yes, 100%. It's an absolute disgrace. And I think that this is where we need to shift. There's a fine line between understanding behaviours communication. There's a fine line between understanding diagnosed and undiagnosed needs, but it's not condoning. And I think that's where it gets so muddled up sometimes. And that's where people don't know what to do. Should I give a consequence? Should I not? What does this mean? But actually, there is a middle ground that we can come to. But it takes, as every single caller has said this morning, it takes a huge shift. We need massive shifts from the top down in order to see the type of impact that we'd want to see in the future. But yeah, this should not be the norm as it has now become. But we need a mindset shift. It needs to start there, and then it filters all the way down. It's going to take time. Things are
takes a village.
It's going to take time. Yeah,
takes a village to raise a child, and a lot of people are on their own as well, aren't they?